Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Navarez, and I'm just here to welcome you this afternoon to the Santa Fe Indian School and to the first meeting of the New Mexico chapter of the Internet Society. The Internet Society, as many of you already know, works globally and is an advocate for Internet access and equality around the world. We're lucky, thanks to Meredith Ingram back here, who first drugged them all the way to New Mexico, maybe a little over a year ago. A lot has happened in a short period of time. Many of you attended the Indigenous Connectivity Summit in November here in Santa Fe at Hotel Santa Fe, and reports from that event are on the table. You're welcome to take a copy. We're going to get started with a discussion and some sharing, particularly with some guests here that have been up to their elbows, literally, in fiber and some pretty amazing things happening in our region that we want to share. Before we get started, we will go around the room quickly just to ask you to say your name, where you came from, and we'll quickly just give everybody a chance to see who's in the room. So you want to share with us?
I'm John Cole. I'm the founder and developer of newsbiz.com.
Chris Rajay, I'm with the Santa Pueblo IT department.
Garrett Clark, I'm the New Mexico broadband program manager.
Don Knight, I'm with Walking Public Services.
Dr. George Rivera, also with Walking Pueblo Services.
Original name was Loewenberg, and when I got to school, they had to change my name because they didn't know how to write it. So they said, from now this day, your name is going to be Drake. So they changed my name to Elroy Drake. And then every once in a while, I get this literature says, we have traced your ancestors to England. So I should get a picture of myself and send it to them.
Richard Loewenberg for Smile Institute.
Meredith Ingram, co-founder of the ISOC New Mexico chapter.
Mike Ripperger, New Mexico Public Regulation Commission.
Bob Balance, I'm a resident of Santa Fe, broadband activist.
Tim Harville, recent Santa Fe transplant from Washington, D.C. My last job was doing photo technology at the White House.
Brooke Hunter, recent transplant with him from Washington, D.C., where I spent the last 10 years doing tech policy.
I'm Krista Van Leeuwen, and I work with Meredith in the other half of her job, which is a PR agency, 66 and Company in Santa Fe.
Hi, I'm Sonia Lopez. I'm with Congressman Lujan's office.
Hello, I'm Michael Sanchez, owner of CDM Telecom Consultants here on behalf of our ABQ Gig Consortium in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
My name is Leah Todd. I'm a freelance reporter based up in Taos, and I'm also the Mountain States coordinator for the Solutions Journalism Network, which is working with Antonia and National Native News and a bunch of other New Mexico news outlets to do a reporting project on rural internet connectivity and solutions to all the problems that are tied up in that.
Good afternoon, my name is Kevin Lewis, from the Pueblo Cochiti Education Director, oversee the library and language programs. Like Mr. Drake, my last name stems from my grandfather when he joined the service. He couldn't spell his last name, so good to see you all.
Good afternoon and welcome to Santa Fe Indian School. My name is Kimbo Sikiakwaptiwa. I'm the manager of Amarant Critical Infrastructure, and before that I worked in IT here at the Santa Fe Indian School.
Hi, I'm Antonia Gonzalez, and I'm the anchor and producer of National Native News, which comes out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I guess I'll be moderating the panel today. Thank you.
I'm Alana McGrattan, New Mexico State Library Tribal Libraries Program Coordinator. We have 19 recognized public libraries on reservations in New Mexico, and the state supports them in various ways through my program. However, my career was here at the first Albuquerque and then Santa Fe Indian Schools, library media coordinator.
And by the way, my name's Jennifer, as I said earlier, but I run a local nonprofit called Community Learning Network. I'm really a teacher at heart. I'm also the greatest job in the world. But anyway, I did move to New Mexico from New Orleans as a refugee, and I got scooped up by the communities here. I actually lived in Hogback on the edge of Shiprock for 2 years and was very, very grateful to spend my time recovering and reshaping how to live life as a good human from that point on. And I run the New Mexico TechWorks project. We're mapping our tech ecosystem and promoting tech education and access. So we have amazing things happening, and a lot of times we don't all know. So today I'm really grateful, Kimball, that you said yes, let's talk. And we'll introduce Antonia, who's going to actually moderate a discussion. So our guests here can share a little bit about what's going on up here in northern New Mexico.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. And we'll start with Kimball. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the tribal consortium that was created to help address some of these issues facing tribes when it comes to improving technology?
Sure. So I feel like, I would first like to acknowledge the consortium members that we have in the room. Kevin has been active from Cochiti, Pueblo, Chris Ruggieri from Santa Ana IT department, Bruce Garcia, who's slipping into the back but should be in a chair that we could quickly move right here next to us, tribal administrator from San Felipe, Pueblo. And our third member community is the Pueblo of Santo Domingo. When we came together, we came together around a funding opportunity based on the experience that some of us had. But I think that before that, we were all at doing our best, going alone, trying to bring broadband to our communities. Even here at the Santa Fe Indian School, you know, it's Santa Fe, it's the capital of New Mexico. It took us about 5 years to bring a broadband connection, and it really took us meeting the broadband people community in New Mexico, many of which I know from years now that are in the room, and to work together to realize that we couldn't do it alone, especially if we were going to be looking at fiber infrastructure where we're working in a line. You know, neighbors have to work with neighbors to pull it off. We have to figure out how fiber works and how it can transform our technology, transform our networks, and what technology means to us. I mean, we're at a school, and you know, we always thought, you know, coming from IT, we fix our local area network, we get the fastest connection we can get, and you know, we've done our job. But now with education, you know, your education doesn't stop at your property line, doesn't stop at the classroom. You know, it is the world, and so bringing us to the world, and the world to us is something that we realized that we needed to do, and we couldn't do it. So I said it took us 6 years for us to bring a fiber-based connection. And then when we got it, we were so excited. We're like, okay, we're going to do these great things that are important to us. And what's important? What does our tribal leader tell us is important? And it's so we turned to our 19 communities in the Pueblos that own and operate Santa Fe Indian School, to the other communities we serve in New Mexico, you know, the Navajo Nation and the Apache tribes, to say, let's do something awesome with this technology. And what we realized is that their networks and their connection speeds are so slow that they couldn't talk back to us. So then we said, okay, let's back up. We have to go and work on infrastructure issues and keep programming really close behind or work in tandem, but the infrastructure had to change. So our merry band of consortium members came together, and we took advantage of what was called E-rate. It's a FCC subsidy program, E-education rate. The rules changed significantly a couple of years ago to allow for special fiber construction beyond your school property or beyond your library. That's who's eligible. And we were able to be awarded a self-provision network for about $4.2 million to connect the tribal libraries in our 4 communities, and then have a tie back up to Santa Fe Indian School to continue that educational component. I don't know if anybody would like to add on to our story here.
Well, first of all, what Kimball was describing in just a very few minutes here was, as she described, a very, very long process. And it was also a matter of people knowing each other to be able to collaborate and make connections. Because, for instance, with the FCC grant, there has to be a community match. And that's a real challenge in tribal communities. the anchor institution recognized is schools and libraries. So we were able to construct a way forward for this project by going through the libraries and their funding from the state. One of the allowable expenditures for that is broadband, internet connectivity, equipment for the library. And as a matter of fact, in New Mexico, according to our regulations for recognizing public libraries, one of the criteria is that there is internet connectivity at the library that the community members can use. And in some of our communities, that's quite a challenge, and in some of our communities, they're kind of hanging by a thread. But in the years that Kimball and I have been working on this, and we started, I think it was about 4 years ago, doing speed tests in all of our tribal libraries to see, you know, what's the baseline, where are we? And there's been significant improvement because of the project that Kimball described and another project that's coming forward from the Pueblos of Jemez and Zia, has been a real leader in this whole area of technology. I know we were the first library in the first library in the state of New Mexico to have a patron access catalog. We could actually sit down at a computer and find the materials in the library. It wasn't connected to the internet. It was 1985, but Santa Fe Indian School has always been at the forefront and has been a leader, and in this project has directly led the communities in this path. And I'm very proud to be a part of the Santa Fe Indian School, and it's exciting for me now that I'm working at the State Library to be able to bring those two entities together.
And Kevin, like tribes across the country, Kimball was explaining, there's 19 Pueblos here. There's also the Navajo and Apache tribes. Tribes across the country, including here in New Mexico, lack just basic infrastructure needs. And when it comes to technology, this kind of technology bringing to the communities is so important that people may not realize that tribes, community members, rely on the internet for education, for healthcare, for jobs, to help with education for jobs as well. So can you talk a little bit about that and why that's so important?
Sure. You know, one of the things that we serve at the library is students, K through 12, and of course our college students as well. Being that we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the speeds that we need. You know, our tribal government, our tribal complex, we operate off of one provider that provides us 1.5 megs. So you can imagine the whole tribal complex trying to pull that. Our Department of Natural Resources, our Health Department, and of course Education, and then we have our Finance Department. So everybody's vying for this 1.5, right? It's lightning fast. We can do all kinds of stuff with it. Not really, but. So, you know, when it comes down to education, education pieces, you know, we have our students there in the afternoon for after-school program with the new standards and with the state in Mexico with the park testing. You know, there's practice testing they can do, but unfortunately, our internet's not fast enough to do that. And then we have our college students that come in that want to take classes online. We just don't have the speed to handle that. Fortunately, working with Kimball, when we first explored E-Rate, we were able to go a wireless option where we have a wireless cellular provider within the area where we're actually able to pull that signal in and push it off a router. So we're averaging about 15 megs a second, which is like lightning fast compared to 1.5. So, you know, it's a little better. We did have a student last year that completed her master's degree through online classes at the library. But of course, we had to prioritize who can be on the internet. I'm sorry kids, you're doing research. You're limited to half an hour today. And, you know, we're trying to do our best because this teacher actually teaches our students within the community. We want to make sure that she furthers their education, right? So it's just it's hard to juggle who gets the internet today, who gets it tomorrow, and then we don't have the option of providing it, you know, wirelessly for anybody outside of the library. So it's just a little difficult, and, you know, we're only 30 miles south of the capital of New Mexico, you know, and yet we're pretty rural. We're tucked back in next to the Jemez, so, you know, so close to the capital, but yet so far divided digitally. And that's true for, you know, most rural communities, not just Native communities in New Mexico, you know. Any community that's just, you know, 34 miles outside of Albuquerque, outside of Santa Fe, you know, unfortunately, we don't have those connections. And, you know, the only option that we have right now, or the only option is a cellular provider or something like Houston and Wild Blue, just the internet off the satellite. But then we're all, you know, New Mexico weather, it's always raining, it's always snowing, so No, I'm just kidding. It never happens, but there are times when weather comes, plays effect with that.
And Kimball, can you add to that? What are some of the issues that you hear? Kevin was just saying they're 30 minutes from the city. What about some other communities who are not close to any kind of city? Are there different challenges?
Basic lack of choice, paying way too much for way too slow of speeds. I mean, and the cell phones, the data plans, they're nice until your data runs out. The monthly fee, the satellite, the latency, limits their application. So in a way, it's the same story, whether you're 30 miles or you're on the western border of, and some of our Navajo chapters are especially challenged. There's some organizational issues with. The market's the market. So when you have no choice and you have not a big budget, what are you going to do? Well, we look for programs, we look for what we're eligible for. So then we get in the game of grants and chasing things and matches and deadlines, and it's a labor-intensive process, but I guess that's a choice that we have now. What I wanted to add about the library, though, is why they're so important as critical computing centers in the communities. So where there's a public library in New Mexico, the residents are going to the library to use the computers, especially if they don't have the internet. So the education for lifelong learning, all levels of life is definitely is definitely occurring there. But just everything, to get a food handler certificate, to get your driver's license, taxes, for our artisans to send pictures of their jewelry to get into a show. All these, the libraries are serving this function for everybody's daily livelihood. So with our project, that's why it was such a nice tie to work with the community libraries, so that we could at least support them at these robust speeds that, it's fiber-based, it's scalable, it's gonna be awesome. And then look to how we can serve the broader community needs. So what Kevin was saying about, with the 1T1 and how it grew, and being like, oh, here comes, the teacher, everybody off the internet. That definitely happens, but we also see that that the libraries their Wi-Fi is bleeding into the parking lot, that's the Wi-Fi for the community. So the nighttime parking lot Wi-Fi is an infrastructure. That's like for in our state, and I suspect all over the country. So I'm not sure if that exactly is what you're asking.
And would you like to expand on the education needs and other services, why those are so critical to tribal communities?
Well, I think one significant thing that I'm seeing in the rural communities in New Mexico, tribal communities, is that as there's an aging population, young people are needing to move home to the reservation to care for elderly parents and relatives. And let's say there's a large family and maybe there's somebody here who maybe doesn't have children in schools in Albuquerque or Santa Fe, and so maybe they're the one picked to go do that. But very often they're interrupting their education. And so if they had the opportunity to be able to take online classes, there are so many things that they can, certificates they can get online that would then lead to jobs for them later. The unemployment rate in the Navajo community that I'm working with, which is the only public library in all of eastern Navajo, which is the western part of New Mexico, and it's almost a quarter of the state. It's what we call the checkerboard area because it's not all reservation land. It's like private land, federal land, state land. So it makes easements very complex. But in that part of the state, there are a lot of elderly parents, and they don't have any resources to continue their education, or I've met some who are doing some really interesting entrepreneurship things, either in the arts, or I recently met a young man at Torreon who's developing a tourist business to do boutique tours to different areas that would be more appropriately done by a Navajo person. But without a robust connectivity, you can't really have a business and you can't continue with your education.
And Kimball, maybe you can expand on some of the progress and some of the projects that are being worked on, including what you had mentioned about bringing the fiber network to some of the Pueblos, including Cochiti.
Sure. And I'll say that I can speak best to the projects that we've been working with, but there's a lot going on in the state. The state has a broadband deficiencies correction program. I was just thinking to myself that some people, this sounds so like justice system penal as a title, but it has the best. It's an excellent effort and it's showing a lot of progress. It's Susana Martinez has put together a team from the New Mexico IT department with the Public Education Department and the PSFA, Public School Facilities Authority, to help with the matching funds for the E-rate program. So it's helping schools apply for E-rate in districts, and it's just made tremendous leaps and strides in the last couple years. So I know that that's happening. On our tribal front, we taken a different approach, and that's to say, your school do it this way or your library do it this way, but kind of look at it geographically, community-based approach, and say, okay, you're the library and the school in that community. You need to work together, and then you need to work with the one next to you, and let's get together all of those interests. And so we formed two consortium, one in the Middle Rio Grande, which includes the 4 Pueblos that connect Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And then there's a Western consortium going out of Bernalillo, and that includes Jemez and Zia. The Middle Rio Grande includes the 4 tribal libraries, and then the Jemez Zia includes 2 state, and then their 2 tribal libraries. Both were funded in the 2016 E-rate cycle. That was the first year that special construction projects were allowed. They both are about $4 million and include about 30 miles of self-provision networks. And then there's the mower right there for us, if you're wondering, the happy moan. And they build to Bernalillo, and then they switch to a pair of leased dark fiber that goes into 505 Marquette and Albuquerque, our regional co-location space. It would have been prohibitively expensive to build into Albuquerque, and there was a provider that leased dark fiber, so then that was a nice tie into the project. They both have to be lit by June 30th. We're substantially complete with the trenching and plowing on the Middle Rio Grande side. We're finishing some directional boring or drilling across a set of arroyos is the last segment. So we're looking to finish those in the next 3 weeks. It turns out that those arroyos, like when you're going from San Felipe, going past the San Felipe's casino, there's that arroyo underneath there, or a little bit farther up at Santo Domingo, where you see them running when they're raining, but they're usually just like dry arroyos. Well, those are considered navigable waterways under. And so we had to get, Army Corps permits. We have to go like way down, like 10, 15 feet down, and then we hit rocks. So the first directional drill they brought out, it wasn't big enough, and now we're to the second one. Now we're to the big one with the big, that takes like a 6-man crew and 3 vehicles to operate. So we're learning a lot about dirt and and how to get through it. So it's been a physical process to this point, and working through just needing the cooperation of our tribal governments and having their support at the governor and the council level has been critical. The tribal administrators, Bruce is one, to be able to have the awareness of how funding works internally from the tribe and put it together with resolutions and get it through the tribal process to interact with the constructor who needs to submit some of that paperwork to go into a DOT permit or a railroad permit. Then they can actually start the construction. So we've learned tremendous amounts through, and I'll just say it, I think 2 years ago when this one had the bright idea to say, let's go for it. And there are 3 of us in a room. It's totally his fault. We didn't know what we were getting involved in, and I don't know that I would have been so brave to do it, knowing what the work effort was. But I will say that our team, our consortium, we have education, we have IT, who's played a critical role in tribal IT. It turns out that a lot of us, half of our tribes, do not have IT departments, so we can't rely on their expertise. When we have the broadband connection, we can't assume that there's something to plug into. So we've really had to bring the tribal networks up to a certain standard, or to organize them, to say, okay, Santo Domingo, we're gonna bring in one big internet connection, and then you can distribute that, over your network, as opposed to those, 12, 15 tribal programs, some of them having multiple internet connections, multiple internet contracts, T1s, hotspots, satellites, whatever they could scrape up. So they're paying an enormous monthly recurring charges for, very, very just spotty service. So we've had to learn how to support our tribal IT. We've learned Santa Ana. Chris has showed a lot of leadership. Their network, they actually have a wireless community network already in place. They already had a partial fiber ring. So they were able to help the other Pueblos, on that front. But what we've realized is we need to take advantage of networking opportunities like this with the Internet Society. Just even the announcement for the IT, go meet with UNM, go meet with Aaron, and come together as a learning community for IT, because we're going to have to develop our own IT professionals somehow. And this is just an open offer to everybody to join us. If you want to teach us or you want to learn from us, we really need to build our internal capacity. And I think as we move beyond the dirt, and once we light up, we can return to programming and say, okay, we just built this awesome tool, but we have to use it well and responsibly for the benefit of the community. Also be good. But also to develop that capacity around just IT stewardship.
And when is that planned or scheduled for? Is there a date?
Oh, we have to be lit by June 30th by E-rate. That is the extension. By some way, we will have those two networks lit. And yes, it's exciting. The Middle Rio Grande, we're ahead of schedule, which is awesome. Hey, Mizia, you'll see that equipment out going 550 in the next couple weeks.
And Kevin, if there's some tribes, some IT people watching who are interested in what the Pueblos here and the Navajo and Apache tribes are doing, what is some of the advice if they want to do something similar to bring to their communities?
So some of the advice we can give is, give us a call. We've been through it all. We've been through the beginning phases. Apparently it's my fault, like Kimball said. But it's been a learning experience through the whole thing. Our consortium, when we first banded together, wasn't just to get internet for our rural communities. It's really to help out Native America, any rural community. So anybody that needs help, especially with E-rate and going forth. At our last meeting, I had mentioned that I want to pose to our tribal librarians that we present at the next ATOM. It's a tribal kind of librarian conference, the national one, to present there and talk about E-rate and the possibilities and the programming that it could bring into communities. So anybody that has any questions related to E-rate, any way we can definitely help out. But it's something that should be explored. There's subsidies that are paid to the large telecom people across the states that dollars are specifically earmarked for reaching rural communities, but those dollars don't go there. There's dollars that pay to CenturyLink, to Comcast to reach these communities, but where do they go? It just stays within the city. So, we're trying to push forward. We're staying afloat a little bit, I think. But any way that we can definitely help out any community or anybody, we're definitely here to do that. And anybody that wants to join our consortium and helping us, teaching us, we're more than welcome to.
And what's the contact that you can give out for the consortium, or how to reach you? Or whoever the contact is.
Santa Ana's setting up a toll-free number for us. You can reach us through Ameren Critical Infrastructure. Ameren is historically a Native American insurance company, but has really been fast-forwarding from their beginning in protecting tribal homes and tribal communities to nowadays, where the critical infrastructure is the fiber optic, and they felt like they wanted to create an arm that would be dedicated to supporting tribes all across the country. But it's Amaranth Risk is the website, and then you can find our contact information there, and I can forward it to the group.
And Kimball, you had touched on it a little bit. Maybe this is a tribal leader question, but how important is tribal sovereignty when it comes to bringing in these projects? And you had mentioned collaboration and making sure you're working, everybody's working together. So you have the tribal government, local, state, and federal level. Can you expand on how important that is?
Well, I would almost want to throw the mic over here to Bruce so he can add from a tribal perspective, but it's huge. This is, when you think self-determination, this is a prime example of self-determination. It's the tribes coming together, providing for themselves, and not expecting other people to do it for them, or not saying, with just saying, we have a need. What are our resources here? Who can we put together, and let's figure it out. And that's what we did. With the broadband, it is such a core function of all, as we know, all aspects of business, of government, public safety, health, wastewater treatment. You know, the SCADA system, that's where we're seeing a lot of fiber coming onto the reservations. You know, if we want to start doing more like green grid applications or thinking about energy solutions, it's going to play a vital role. So I think this is the backbone and the communication infrastructure that is going to springboard other tribally, you know, self-government, self-determining projects forward. It's going to be the conduit to make them all easier.
Bruce, would you like to, we'll open it up to questions. Let me have, Bruce, can you introduce yourself and just answer the question of tribal sovereignty and how important it is to have all the different entities working together?
Okay, Cyrus late, everybody. Hear me? Okay. Yeah, I was busy walking up hills trying to figure out where do we put the cell tower that San Felipe needs. So this really is, as the topic is, a true effort in tribes determining their own sovereignty needs in the community and doing something about it. We have engaged, for San Felipe, I know our IT department engaged CenturyLink to come in and build the infrastructure, but we were too small for them to make any profit. So we had no choice but to say, okay, to me, and I always preach in the community to our younger generations that we're sending them off to get their education, get their degrees. We support them with tribal scholarships, and why not utilize them when they come back? You know, I say they have the capacity just like any of us sitting around here, and I always look to them and tell them and encourage them that you're coming back with more knowledge than what the previous generations had, and we need to utilize you to determine the best path for our community, and that's truly what it is. We know from our respective communities we're all different. Although we have got 19 Pueblos, but we have different ways of doing things. We have different dialects. There's 7 Carisan Pueblos, but we all speak differently, in our dialects, and we have to understand that we can't be grouped together, and say this is your one language that you have to follow. Here's the Keras language, because it's going to be different. So things like that do occur, but our Pueblos have the capacity, and I think with the education and training that our younger generations are coming back with, it gives the Pueblos that it gives gumption to believe in themselves and to do what's necessary for their own benefit in the communities. Now, we can't wait on CenturyLinks or whomever else, not even the state or federal government, because there's too much level of bureaucracy. Our consortium can attest to that. I mean, we've asked BIA to assist us in supporting this project that we worked on, but they sort of go back to their bureaucracy and say, well, you got to do this first, you got to jump through this hoop first, then this hoop, and then if you're not tired, this is the last hoop you have to jump through. But I said, no, we can't wait forever for all of us to go through that process. I mean, we need to determine our own destiny in our communities, and that's what this project means to myself personally. I'm encouraging all four of us to continue to collaborate. Yes, we have some conflicts between our nations, but let's get over that. Let's really think for the future and put things in place for the next generations to really flourish, to not just be last on the list of things that are bad that New Mexico always comes out on, but let's give them the support and the tools that they can be top in any list that comes out, to be top, have the most degrees, have more doctors, have more attorneys, engineers, and whatever that they have hopes and dreams about. And that's what I'm hoping for. That's why I'm working on this, to lay the infrastructure for the next generation.
I'm sorry, who did? Chris? Okay.
So it's been a pleasure working with the four Pueblos and working for the IT department. Some of the challenges we've had, I think as you've gone around the room and listened to people, we're talking about the education and the libraries, but you hear other items that come up, SCADA, you hear providing businesses that are on these tribes. And one of the challenges we've come across is these federal subsidies are very defined. You can do this, but you can't do that. Now, I come from Chicago. I moved here 20 years ago, so I come from a business background, and my goal is sustainability right from the get-go. I want to make it sustainable. Well, the way the federal subsidies are written, it's tied to the library. It's tied to a library entity. There's no way to make that infrastructure sustainable the way these grants are written. And infrastructure is critical to more than just education in these areas, and it allows it to become sustainable. It's nice that E-rate provides a subsidy. It's nice to get a subsidy from the federal government. It's better to be able to walk on your own in a few years and not have to depend on those subsidies. Give a fish, teach a fish, teach to fish, basically. So I would like to see, the ability to do that. We've been working hard to figure out how to build out our own. Santa Ana is kind of fortunate because we're on the border of Bernalillo, Rio Rancho there, but as a consortium, we've been trying to figure out how we can work to come up with something that's sustainable in addition to just being dependent on that federal subsidy as a group. So.
I'd like to mention something that hasn't been stated, but one of the reasons I got involved or started learning about E-rate is that we were working on trying to complete, or apply for the electronic health record that Obamacare enabled for, tribal communities and under IHS to develop an electronic health record system where our clinics could communicate with our Santa Fe service unit, but we didn't have the infrastructure. So, because of the lack of infrastructure, we lost out on that, funding, and we had to try to figure out how do we get connected in a robust manner where records could be sent back and forth. But it is critical for tribal communities in terms of their healthcare system as well. We're dealing with that now through this fiber optic project, and because the tribes agreed to look at other needs and try to come up with plans, how do we meet these other needs in like healthcare, and that's what we're doing with this project as well. So it's because we are rural communities, we don't have that connection, and when we don't have those connections, then we miss out on funding opportunities like that. And sometimes, even the need to have electronic health records didn't come with a budget. Here, we'll give you this much money to be able to get electronic health records. So we had to figure out, okay, how do we do it? Where are there funds to enable us to be able to get connected? So, there's a lot of needs that tribal governments have, and As I mentioned, we are having to do it on our own, and this is one example of how we can do it better with all of us working together.
Good afternoon. And
It's on.
am I on?
Yes.
Again, this is Elroy Nakadne. I'm working with the Navajo Nation. I'm not a IT expert or anything else. And because I'm not an IT expert, I went out and recruited two, I think, of the most experienced experts in the developing fiber connection. That's Mr. Don Knight and Dr. Rivera. And the reason we want to do this is really for purposes of economic development on the Navajo Nation. As you may have read papers here and there, the tribe revenue is starting to decline because of a high use of coal, and now they're going to shut down generating units that were using coal as fuel. And because of that, our revenue source, I think I heard the figure, it dropped 100 million last year going to the tribe. So now we're looking at what are the economic development opportunities. And we looked at everything, and when we finally got all the information, we said, wow, the Navajo Nation sits right in the middle of an area called the Colorado Plateau. We found out, if you look in Wikipedia, it says that nothing has moved for 600 million years. So we have these skinny rock towers that go up 8, 10 stories up like this. They haven't fallen over yet. That demonstrates the stability of the earth right in here. The other thing we saw was that we looked at the weather. The weather is not extreme. We don't have big old floods like they did recently over in the southeast. We don't have earthquakes. We don't have tornadoes. We don't have volcanic activity, et cetera, et cetera. So what we said is we went through a listing of what is it good for. We said, what if we created a haven for data centers? What we needed is a fiber ring, redundant fiber, and redundant power systems. Well, way back when we were thinking about this, we had those power plants all around, surrounding the reservation. And we said, that's going to be our source of power there. But as it turns out, all those connections were already contracted out. We couldn't get anything if we did. So now we have to create our own power source, and that's what we're doing. We're working on a first power plant between Winter and Gallup. The second will be up at Kayenta. The third one will be at Cameron. Now, we're looking at, somebody said, if you're dependent on the federal government to do all this stuff, you might as well wait another 200 years. So what we're going to do is go after private financing to do the rest of it, the fiber ring, so that we can create this industry within the reservation. And when we talk to our tribal leaders that are in charge of economic development, we told them, look, our traditional lifestyle is still valid. When the Great Depression happened, it didn't affect those people at all. Right now, down in the southeast, when they had all the floods, you saw all those people were without shelter, without water, without money. How were they going to continue to live? Well, we didn't have that problem the last economic downturn on the stock market. So what we said is, let's retain that, and let's put these new economic development zones around Gallup, around Flagstaff, around Page, around Farmington. Let's create this fiber ring so it reaches all those, and let's get it so that a data center can have 20 gigabytes one side and 20 gigabytes from the other side. That way, we would like to see the future for our own young people to come back and live there and work. a lot of the younger people aren't going to go back to the old traditional lifestyle, but we think it's still valid. We need to raise our own food, our own livestock, everything. So the three of us are on a mission. And I think we're making headway now. We got the first power plant financed, and it's going up now. But what we'd like to do is eventually get to the point where we have a whole bunch of small 93 megawatt power plants. And it'll be surrounded by solar. Once we do that, we feel that we have redundant source of power supply. All we need is the fiber. And then we'd like to look at what kind of industry can we attract there. Google was already there in Window Rock, but when Google came, our tribal economic leaders were all scratching their heads. What are they talking about? What's a Google? They wanted to put a data center there. So we said, holy mackerel, this is really an opportunity for us. But what we look also is we'd like to work with other tribes. So we're going to create a company not too far in the future, maybe within months. That's going to be called Code Talkers Broadband. That's a little history to honor those people that have done some code talking in the past and bring it to life, back to life, to create revenue streams. That's our mission. Now, I'm going to let you in on something that we've not really shared with anybody, but we think it's time that we start talking about it. We have a huge problem on our reservation, which is uranium. The legacy that was left there by all the uranium mining in the past, we kept looking, how do we fix that? And we've come across a close relative of uranium called thorium. And we started looking at it, and we said, holy mackerel. Thorium could actually solve those uranium problems. It could actually go down to where they store all the spent fuel rods down in some cave down there. We can take it out and run that through. And right now that we understand the half-life of Chernobyl is like 4 billion years. That is terrible. But once it goes through the process, you take some of that spent fuel rods, run it through the process, and then when you finish using it, the half-life of it turns to be 6 years. 6 years, that product is dirt. You can throw it out, you can plant in it and everything. So we said, if we can do that, then we might solve one of the biggest problems we have on the reservation, create economic development, create this broadband, create everything from there. But we also want to retain our lifestyle, because if anything happens in this world, Trump might mess up the economy and turn upside down. The people who maintain their lifestyle of living off the land, like Native Americans, will survive. And that's what we found out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let me check with the timers. How much time, how many questions do we have time for?
I'd say we could take
A couple more questions? Okay.
We have a little bit of time to mill around and
Okay.
also talk to each other. Want to leave
Okay.
I forgot to add one more thing. My notion is this: if you're going to make anything happen, I think this group right here should select somebody that is on this committee that's going to design something at the federal government level. Am I right?
Yeah, for those of you who may not know, on January 8th, Trump signed an executive order for rural communities, including tribal lands. And there's an infrastructure architecture working group falling out of that. And I'm not sure who's being represented there or anything like that, but I think definitely that, you know, as a tribal group, we need to get plugged into that.
Is there some more questions? Oh, maybe one question. Oh, go ahead. Can you pass?
Richard Loewenberg. I have a comment more than a question, or comment and question. I've been involved with broadband planning, no vested interest other than what's the best we can do for lives and livelihoods in this state. And I especially care about rural and tribal work. As a result of the Internet Society's Indigenous Connectivity Summit in early November, I was, which First Mile Institute and I were peripherally involved in and co-sponsored, I was a bit disappointed that the program ended out of time without any coming together or conclusions or next steps, which I think is really important when you get such great people together. What can we do rather than just tell our story? So thinking about that afterwards in the last couple of months, I thought, all right, there's something I can do, or I'll take on a challenge, and that is to produce a current New Mexico tribal broadband rapid assessment report. Just talk to all of you, talk to others that are involved rapidly. It's not an all-inclusive report. It's very hard to do that. But it's a snapshot that helps with decision-making within those communities and among legislators and among others. Just what have we got? What don't we have? What do we need? Who are the primary contacts for doing that work? And a few other very simple things. If you just do that like a page per 19 Pueblos and the additional tribes, so you have 23 entities in this state, at least, plus some federal funding and state agencies and other things, that's already a sizable short report. But I'm working on that right now. And I think it's useful, and I need as much help as I can get, information, resources. So as we end this, I'd like to just exchange contact information and follow up with anybody so we can produce something yet this spring. It's not a big effort, and there's no funding right now. I just thought it'd be useful to do that. Have a current snapshot with good resources.
Thank you. Leah, did you have a question? Okay.
Here.
This is a question for our panelists, I think, or Bruce, since it sounds like you've done a lot of work on this too. This might be a question for you also. And it's two questions, and in journalism school they tell you never to ask two questions back to back because it's confusing and no one knows which question they're supposed to answer. So you can pick which question you want to answer, or maybe you want to answer both. But I'm curious about two things in particular. One, what is your sense of how different your consortiums are and your efforts are from other states and other tribal nations in other states outside of New Mexico and outside of Navajo Nation? Where do you feel like you fall, just from your perspective? And then my second question is, what was the most surprising challenge about your work so far? Something that you thought would be relatively easy that turned out to actually be surprisingly hard. And I feel like that might be helpful for other rural communities and tribal nations who are trying to do this sort of work. So, Kimball, thanks.
Okay, I'll give you just a fact first, and then I'll buy time to think through the other one. So these two applications with E-rate, the rules changing, self-provisioned, all of us first 2016 applications are out on the forefront. For our two tribal consortiums, they were the two largest awards in New Mexico in that year, and they were the only tribal applications of their kind. So the program was new, the FCC order was new, ISOC implementing the FCC order with a new online portal that was almost developed when they told us that we all had to use it, and that was an adventure. Then because there was then organizing, at ISOC for these special fiber reviews with kind of moving targets with something called, excess capacity or just lit service and just what self-provision, just the review process was delayed. So it was, the Hamas and Zia had to be, the end of the funding year, which means the network had to be built, was on June 30th, 2017. they were awarded in the morning of June 30th, 2017. So that gave us, less than 12 hours to build the network. So it's a great program, and it's $4.9 billion, $3.9 billion every year for E-rate for schools and libraries. It's the biggest federal source that I know of right now. So, that makes it worth the effort, but it was really challenging just to work through the program as their rules were evolving. But just as far as us being similar to other tribal consortia, we don't know that there are any other tribal consortia now. But we feel like we've figured out that you really need to work with your library and school together on tribal land, because most tribes are gonna have a tribe and they're gonna have a school. So if you can get them to talk, and it's interesting, and maybe this is an assumption that we make, is that because you live at Cochiti Pueblo, that everybody's doing their thing, but people aren't necessarily talking. Like Indian Health Service gets their money from the same old pot they've been getting it. They know their rules very well and what their limitations are. Next door might be the library, and then next door will be the school. And it turns out that people aren't talking to each other. So they're not coordinating their efforts. And the libraries and the schools especially have such a similar mission that we are not doing ourselves any favors by not coming together regularly to do joint efforts. And I'm going to think on the thing that was the most surprisingly hard. Well, maybe Kevin.
I was gonna actually pass it off to Bruce. But I guess speaking of that, we don't know of any other Native consortia that are out there. Like you said earlier, if there's somebody that wants to band together to create one, we're definitely here to help. But just time-wise, this planning and preparation for this project has been a long 2 years. And we meet every Thursday. It's supposed to be for an hour, but usually goes about 3 hours. So it's just real time consuming. We find out new things come into light every Thursday. So today has to be Internet Society meeting on top of the regular meeting. So it's just a lot of our efforts, a lot of our time that I would normally spend doing programming for our community has been spent just trying to get this infrastructure in. So I'm hoping that once things get lit, we can return to programming and providing that service for our community like we normally do. Bruce?
I got an example as far as what's funny to me. I voiced this at the New Mexico Public Education Department, discussions or government-to-government meetings that we have. I mean, there's an initiative by, I hope I'm not offending any, New Mexico department people, GAR, no offense. But I mean, there's money that's been set aside by Governor Martinez and staff and to connect all public education, schools, and yet we're willing to bring, the Bernalillo Public School, who's right to the south of San Felipe, but they have to get to their public school in Santo Domingo, and the fiber that we're building is running right in front of the school, which is, unfortunately, it's a BIE school, Bureau of Indian Education, and we're having a difficult time in having them agree. And it's just, 50 feet away? Why can't we connect that school? Where the kids are from New Mexico, maybe they're not under NMPED or public school, but they're gonna go into a public school system. So I guess it's the bureaucracy that's been created. I wish we could just go and erase everybody's mindset that the BIA, BIE, IHS, state even, say, let's not make it so impossible, for such simple things to be done. And that's what's funny to me, that things that are logical, even from us Native Americans who didn't develop all these rules and regs, kind of scratch our heads. Then we hear how difficult, the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic people want to make it. So that's what's funny to me.
Rebuttal.
May I just add to that?
and you didn't offend me at all, because the bureaucracy is our biggest problem. And Garrett Clark, I'm the broadband program manager, the Office of Broadband for DoIT, Department of Information Technology. And what Chris has said as far as the E-rate is concerned, and I'm looking at you because it's congressional stuff, is the E-rate formulas going across for schools, libraries, and then healthcare too. And not to mention Lifeline, we'll leave that out for the time being. But these are all should be together in a combined formula. Each one has their own formula, by the way. Each one has their own application process. Unless there's a consortium, then you can bring schools and library together, and they can play with the same formula. But it's daunting, the application process, and it was an epic mess, which is what the system is called. And so there's a lot of collaboratives out there, like Shelby, the Schools, Health, and Library Broadband Coalition, and others, which are saying we really need to look closely at combining all of these grants, so that it's not that if you're a school and you apply, you can't light up the library if you have excess capacity, unless they have their own E-rate, or you go into a consortium. That healthcare clinic right next door, you can't plug it in. I mean, that's like stupid talk. I mean, because all of this is our federal money. It's strands that are sitting in there, and it's cheaper to put in a certain number of strands than what you actually need. And so that excess capacity should be utilized to light up other CAIs, you know. So that's something that we're working on, and we'd like to see change because of the bureaucracy. Now, the Governor's Broadband for Education initiative, which is run out of our office, but is a collaborative between Public Schools Facility Authority and also PED. And that model, we developed that model where we actually hired an E-rate specialist as a consultant to assist any publicly funded school on tribal lands. We can't touch BIE or BIE grant schools, which is too bad because they're part of the fabric, you know, that I just talked about. So, but what's good about these funds is that they're, again, only for schools. $50 million, 5 years, $10 million a year. We had to harvest a bunch of that out, but right now we've got brought in $40 million of federal funds and leveraging only $3 to $4 million of state funds. So it's been very, very highly successful, and we've been lighting up a lot of schools as a result. We need to do the same thing with libraries. We got some legislation now to create a library fund with $1 million in it, so that we can do the same model that we're doing in tribal libraries that are publicly designated. Will be eligible for these funds, and also to have a consultant to assist libraries, because that's a big part of it. So, so we're doing the same thing also with healthcare, and healthcare, by the way, that on the USAC side, the federal side, is a mess. I mean, healthcare clinics aren't able to pay their bills. I mean, CenturyLink is shutting them down because they're not getting the money that's due to them. So. I sound like I'm whining, but what we're really doing is we've accomplished a huge amount as a collaborative. I mean, this is part of the collaborative and the statewide, and we're thinking holistically. And along with the libraries, we're looking at other technologies. Alana and I are going to talk about TV white space coming on, and looking at grant dollars where we can see about getting TV white space out there through the libraries into the communities. And so we'll be talking more about that. Navajo Nation, you guys got 96 strands coming down to Farmington. You know about that? And 96 strands is a lot of stuff. But it's when you talk about SCADA, it's about water. So it's a water project. The settlement that's coming down from Farmington all the way down, it's going to feed Zuni, but it needs a smart grid. And that smart grid is, in order for the pumps, the transformers, all that kind of stuff, 96 strands, and is a huge thing. 12 strands are going to the city of Gallup, but that's going to be huge coming down, and that's a federal project, $1.2 billion as a settlement. So there's a lot of great things happening, and I can go on, but I shan't. Thank you.
Can I make one little comment about touching what Bruce and Gar said? So the Rural Healthcare Connect program for the electronics records that San Felipe was considering, it was the fund that we were looking at to use to serve that need. I was on San Felipe property looking at our fiber pedestals the other day, and I have a really nice picture of the fiber pedestal and then the barren landscape and this herd of cows walking by. And I was just smiling to myself. But when we went to research the Healthcare Connect program and looked up the rural, because it's a rural program, we found out that none of our communities are rural per their definition. So the logic of some of the rules of the federal monies is beyond my comprehension at times.
Go ahead.
Yeah. They're ineligible. They are not eligible for the Healthcare Connect funds unless they join a consortium, and the consortium is majority rural. So that's, you know, a whole, so now we've got, you know, over a 3-year average. So now, you know, now we need to go build this other consortium and find rural people and convince them it's a good idea so that, you know, maybe a San Felipe can join. So it makes time and effort.
Definition of rural, suburban, frontier, all of these things. Each federal government has a different criteria. It's very confusing. But also, too, it's based, at least this one, is based on bad data. Well, illogical information, I would say. So it can be done better.
Well, I think we want to leave some time for mingling and talking and some more intimate conversations with each other. So I want to thank our panelists today, and thank you to the Internet Society and Solutions Journalism. And more information can be found on the Internet Society's Facebook page and website as well.
Yep, I'll just add a quick thing. The Internet Society, actually in the back, we have a whole team from AV Systems. We want to say thank you for connecting us to the world. And Jolly in New York City, believe it or not, has been streaming our conversation to other rural and even indigenous communities that are also struggling with similar challenges, thanks to the Internet Society. Meredith and I also want to just add, if you are not already a member of the Internet Society, it's free. You can jump online, internetsociety.org, join the Internet Society, and then click on the New Mexico chapter. This chapter is a grassroots effort for us to connect with each other. I'm going to go off on a quick tangent because I do have an elder Navajo friend of mine who said, when I very first moved here as a refugee from Katrina, he said, well-being is nourished by being accountable to a people and a place. And our world is a little crazy right now. And he said, we're in a crisis of kinship. So I think Richard often tells me, underneath the internet, it's so much more than wires. It's so much more than fiber. That's you, Richard. And on all of those counts, getting together like this, spending time, learning from each other, talking and helping each other is critical. So I'm grateful for everyone to show up on a busy week. Thank you all for coming together. Please join the Internet Society, and we are building an organization and a board. So if you would like to help us do that for the New Mexico chapter, we would love your assistance. Please see Meredith or me. And last but not least, I did bring a representative from the natural world, and I have 4 plants to share with all of you for speaking today, just to remind us who we're really accountable to, but also to say you guys are growing some amazing things. And just as a reminder, we'd like to pass these down and say thank you. And keep it up. We appreciate it. And thanks for sharing your stories with us today. Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to add thank you so much for National Native News and for Antonia Gonzalez for coming up from Albuquerque to moderate this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's coffee, there's snacks, there's even some candy and brownies. So help yourselves. Thank you again, everybody. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Sure.